There we go. We're recording.
All right. So we're back at it.
Yep.
So I think last time we talked a little bit about your sort of four takes on what is real, right? Which I love that. And I think to me is a very useful way to think about the world. It's useful, I would say. And then to dive back into the book, like the next chapter, which is actually, this is hilarious. It's chapter 1. We're only in chapter 1.
Just getting there.
The title's Created to Trust. And I think as I've shared with you, Matt, like this and the Faith Island stuff is probably the most impact, like of all the stuff that I've learned from you and heard from you, like this is the most impactful for me personally. And we'll dig into what that is, but for me, this idea around trust, and like even in the book, I love at the end of the book, you've got like a place to make a list of the things that you're trusting in, right? And I think one of the things I've talked about is that this book is a way to be more aware, and like this is a very critical awareness that I had never thought of before you, to just make a list of the things that I'm trusting in, right? And that is incredibly valuable. So I just want to kind of open the floor. I don't have a question, but just more like, as you think about this chapter 1, what do you want to tell us about trust, the importance of it, what role it plays in this book?
I'm pausing because, like, how do I capture that? Because for me, once I chose to approach this from a philosophical perspective, right? Once we lifted ourselves out of all the religious focus and the theology and the doctrine and all that stuff, which is important, right? It's super important. But when we backed it up, like, I'm trusting all those things. And everybody in their religion thinks it's the right one. Otherwise, what are they doing in it, right?
Yeah.
And they all want to prove that they're right so that they feel confident in it. And I was part of that. And we've already talked about that. But what woke me up to the potential here is, I mean, interesting. John writes, I've written this stuff down so that you would believe. And then all of a sudden you just start seeing belief all over the Bible, which is my foundation. And I'm realizing, wait, Jesus didn't invite us into proving things. He didn't invite us into knowing things. He didn't invite us into like, I'm right, you're wrong. He said, you believe me and you get life. You trust in me and you get life. And then I started realizing, wait a second. If I'm going to trust that God in the flesh, right, walking around, is saying believe as the primary focus,
yeah,
why are we not starting there? Like,
yeah,
and belief is it. And I think what I found interesting is then, as I kept going that route, oh wait, well, Buddhists are believing and Muslims are believing, and ironically the atheists are believing. Wait a second, then it was like, wait, well, who's not believing? And that, not that there was a question there, but what do I have to say about it? Well, what I have to say about it is everything is based off of trust.
yeah.
And ironically, the people who want to push back against that, which I used to be one, I still wrestle with it. But when we're like, no, I can prove this. No, I can prove this. No, I can prove this. Are the ones who I think are a little nervous. What I found is they're a little nervous to take that humble position, to take the honest look and say, wait a second, I don't need to prove that I'm right. I don't need to do that. There's a freedom in letting go of that and acknowledging the truth that I am trusting, that I am believing. And ironically, that should be easy for Christians because that's what Jesus was saying it's all built off of. He even says to some people, you're not seeing the kingdom because you're not believing it. Not that you're not proving it, but you're not believing. You're not seeing miracles and signs and wonders because you're not believing them, right? I guess what I'm saying is like, it's so foundational for any Christian, anyone who's going to call himself a Christian. But then from there, I started looking around and like, well, wait, we're all doing this. Everybody's just doing it. And then that hardest one is like, well, what about math? Or what about science? And you sit down with the hardcore mathematicians and they're like, oh, yeah, it's all theory. We're all trusting this. And the scientists are all saying, well, of course, you go do the scientific method. It's all theory. I'm like, we're all trusting. So
Yeah.
there it is. 3 minutes later, my little ramble, we're just all doing it. And so the reason why I want to start there is that's what it's all built off of. And then, like we said, I think in one of the earlier sessions, that's why I can have you on the bench next to me, and you're trusting, I'm trusting. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
Let's have a conversation about this, knowing that we're not going to land on, well, I won, you're wrong, I got it. Like we're not going to land there. So then watch what happens here, and I'll stop talking. But that changes the focus of our conversation if the goal is not to necessarily win.
Yeah, dude, that's what I would say. So I think you just reminded me of something. So first is the you're providing a possibility for conversation between two people who think differently, not by saying, hey, have you thought about X? Have you thought about Y? Have you looked at it this way? But rather just to say, hey, tell me what you're trusting in.
Yeah.
Like, and I, again, embarrassingly, I feel like I'd never made that list. And, one of the things that you pointed out somewhere along the way, and I'm sure you said it 100 times, I only heard you say it once, which is like some people, the first thing they would put on that list would be the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. I trust in the Bible. Yeah. Well, how do you know the Bible's trustworthy? And so most people would probably default to like, well, there's some scientific evidence and there's some history and there's, it's like, well, those are the things you're trusting in. You're trusting in the thing that verifies the thing you say you're trusting in. So it's like, again, and probably not every individual, there's a number of answers to why do you think the Bible is trustworthy? It's the one question beyond, which I love. And so that's the trust list. And if you're like, well, the fossil record, well, then that's science. And great, look, we both believe in science. Can't we say that? And that breeds some common ground. So anyways, but I think also just the recognition that we're all doing it. And I would say that lately there's two thoughts. One is back to, I don't know that this one made it in because it may have been a thing that got edited out, but we talked about how, was it Chesterton was sort of famous for being able to laugh about some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's the ability to laugh about it is probably related to the fact that he understood that it was faith-based, that there was trust involved, and it wasn't about proving it, although he certainly was willing to do the intellectual engagement. It wasn't about coming to proof. And I wonder if the people that can't have this discussion, it's really because it's too sensitive. They don't. Yeah.
It's painful. I think it's often very scary and very painful because people haven't done the work. See, and this is what it does, is we can talk all day about what we believe as we sit on the bench.
Yeah.
But what this does, and this is the power of philosophy, and it's a powerful tool, is it's why do you believe? Not just what. It's why, and that's the point. That's why this is honestly just straight up different, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, I trust the Bible. Cool, that's great. Why do you trust it? And I find so many kids are like, I don't know. Well, then that's scary, but then is it trustworthy or not? And if it's not, well, then what are you doing believing it if it's not trustworthy? I think two thoughts. One is that is vulnerable and often really scary for people to realize, oh my goodness, wait a second now. I'm just realizing that the things that I'm trusting on that list maybe aren't that trustworthy.
Yeah.
So now what are you going to do? Right? Well, hopefully go find some other things that are, right? And I think that process can be so liberating and freeing if you're willing to follow it through. I will say this though, you're not using it if you don't trust it. You're
Yeah.
not going to go to a doctor that you don't trust and go under anesthesia and get surgery.
Yeah.
I wrote this into the book. I am not going to let someone belay me rock climbing 80 feet up on a rope if I don't trust them. And so we
Right.
see that with the big obvious things, right? But what we've failed to realize is that we're doing that all the time with everything. And that is meant to be empowering for us to move towards things that are trustworthy. But it also takes work because you're not just like, oh, I believe it because I believe it. Like, it takes a
Yeah.
little work, right?
Yeah.
Um,
You made me think, and we've kind of committed to not name dropping here, which is hard for an English professor but because you want to give credit where credit is due. But
true.
the thing the phrase that comes to mind, which is not my own, is that the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty.
Yeah.
And so we cling to certainty because it feels safer. But what you're advocating for is to step out into maybe a less safe space of trust, which is actually trust and faith are synonymous.
They're the same
But
thing. Well,
yeah,
I throw that out there. If you're going to cling to certitude because it feels safer, but wait a second, then you're going on emotion there in some respects because you think this feels safer because it feels certain, but in truth, there's no way to verify that with 100% certitude. So
right,
you're actually clinging to something for safety when more it's actually less safe to cling to certitude than to live by faith, because living by faith is just the honest truth. We're all doing it. Clinging to something that you believe is certain actually isn't honest.
right.
So it's less safe
Yeah,
then.
yeah, yeah. So I think again, my point is this, the beauty of this is, no one has put a capstone on philosophy and said, hey, we figured it out.
Got
No
it.
one has put no one has put a capstone on faith or religion, right? There's clearly, even within very specific segments of faith, so my upbringing was in a Baptist church. Well, even within the Baptist church, there's a good deal of wrestling and discussion about some of these things. Like we've never quite nailed it. So it is open for discussion. One of the things I love about what you're doing is saying, hey, this lens of trust, being more aware of what you're actually trusting in is an exercise to do that is incredibly valuable. And for you personally, but also might lead to an ability to have a really good discussion with someone who trusts other things.
Yeah.
Um, so anyways, I love it. As I said, it's been incredibly valuable to me personally. So I give you some credit for that and say thank you. Um, and then the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit. So here's a pivot.
Well,
Um,
can I throw one thought
oh
before the
yeah,
pivot?
sorry. Yep, I cut you
Two
off too.
thoughts.
Go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
two thoughts. And the first one is I wouldn't be landing on this trustless stuff without conversations with you in your classroom. So you're trying to give me credit for the stuff that I was calling it trust bucket. Trust list is way better. So kudos to you and thanks for the conversations, right? Because that's why, again, we're here. How many years later? And it's happening. We're in it and we're both benefiting from this. So I have benefited from this with you. But I want to say something. I don't know if it's time for this, but it often comes up in my classes. So I'm just going to say it. And if I have to chop it, I'll chop it. But this is one thing that I find so compelling about what Jesus offers. And so this gospel message is a message of grace, right? You are loved, grace. You're saved with grace upon grace. It's this God pursuing us and God saving us by grace, not by what we do, not by figuring it out, not by all the doctrine, not by getting it right. We're saved because we're loved, right? Since everything is based off of trust, and we can't verify it with 100% certitude, can you see why, if there is a God and he knows we're in this situation, that he would choose to save us by grace? Because otherwise we have to figure it out. And actually, can we?
Right.
And so I don't know if that's the place to put this, but to me, there's something so freeing then with the conversations, with the love, with the journey, that God knows I can't verify with 100% certitude. So A, he knows that. That's why he's saving me by grace. So I don't have to completely figure it out. B, how kind. Like, that's really not like, thanks. Like,
Yeah.
thanks. If we're going to pick a religion, why not pick the one that saves us by grace and trust that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point and good discussion. And you're correct. That is too big.
It's too big.
But we can revisit it.
Okay,
for
we'll
sure.
revisit it later.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, that is an important point. And what I've learned, grace for me has taken a new turn as I get older, and I see myself making mistakes that are common to man. I used to beat myself up and go, hey, that's a dumb mistake. Everybody makes that mistake. And now I go, everybody makes that mistake. So I think the older you get, the more that word grace can begin to take on new light and new meaning. But
let's pivot.
Yeah, let's pivot. Well, I love that you said it, but I'm trying in my brain to think about grace as it relate, so the point is that we're all trusting. It sounds as if you're saying grace is like an extra measure of it's okay. it's okay. You're not going to get this right.
So it's okay.
And that's okay.
That's okay.
But yet, I have to hold you to the fire, Matt. You're simultaneously saying that you feel pretty confident that the way that you've directed your life and your faith and your belief is I'm going to use the word. No, I'm not going to use that word. Is more complete.
Yeah.
So we're going to stick with the list of things you're trusting. I think one of the things that you would argue for is that the method that the religion and the faith that you've landed on is more complete. So to ask that question in a little bit more pokey way, pokey as in like hard or challenging, I do wonder if you could explain when you say this is where you've landed, and when you talk about Chester, the ripping the cloth into tiny shreds, I'm assuming that you're saying that you're reassembling those shreds, you're putting them back together, and in your mind, and probably in Chesterton's mind, more pieces of that fabric are within that last category of Christian theism. So I guess I'm stumbling around because I don't want to ask the question directly. I'm trying to be